Hello, students. To kick off this chapter, I'd like to give you an activity that is not for a grade, which you can do, which will help to preface our chapter 3 on ethics. So this is called the core values activity. The steps that outline it, and the document is separate. It's included in Blackboard under chapter 3 under core values activity. So you'll highlight the values that resonate with you. You'll arrange them into 5 groups as you see fit. You'll make them actionable and rank in order of personal importance. So let's look at that document. So it should take about 10 minutes. Basically, you're giving a large list with which, if you want to print it out, you can circle them. If you want to keep it online, you can just highlight the specific words that resonate with you, in color. But basically, you should pick at least 20 to 25 words that resonate with you. And if there's some value that is not listed, then just go ahead and write it out to the side and include it in step 2. Step 2, you're going to group all similar values together. So you need to group these in a way that makes sense to you. So if freedom falls under happiness for you, then that would be a subcategory of happiness. If happiness falls under freedom, then freedom would be the main category, and then happiness would fall under it. So after you group them, figure out which one ends up being on top of each of those groups. The top or the main classifier of each group will move on to what should be step 3. There. Add a verb to each value. So, um, in this way, you're going to make your value actionable. So, freedom by itself, if that's a value that you embrace, then how do you make freedom actionable? Do you live in freedom? Do you preach freedom? Do you discuss freedom? However, you are going to live that out in your life is the way you're going to put it in a sentence. So, once you have each of those, um, you're going to post your core values and put them in order of your preference, right? So if freedom is above all else, then you would list that as number 1. And then put this in some prominent space and refer to it on a daily basis. Or when you're concentrating or when you're taking a break, you can kind of look back at this and remember where you're heading in life and making sure that your goals and your decisions are tied together with your core values. So that is living your core values. Now that we're in chapter 3, I wanted to do a brief recap of chapter 1 to help you guys refer back as we move forward and we progress towards the first exam. So, number 1, what is the invisible hand? Hopefully, you watch the video on the invisible hand and have a really good understanding of how it works in day-to-day life. But the definition is when self-directed gain leads to social and economic benefits for the whole community. So, as people improve their own situation in life, they help the economy prosper through the production of goods, services, and ideas. Number 2, what conditions did Adam Smith say needed to be met in order for this concept to work? So, as we remember, he believed that freedom was vital to any economy's survival, and owning land or property and the right to keep the profits of the business were essential to making that happen. He believed that people will work hard if they believe they'll be rewarded. So, how do we summate that into the conditions? So, there were 4 main conditions. 1, the right to own private property. 2, the right to own a business and keep the profits. 3, the right to competition. And 4 was the freedom of choice. Number 3, do you think the invisible hand alone can produce the best result for everyone? Pure capitalism. So, as we discussed, actually, I think that was chapter 2. Um, your specific answer would be outlined in your belief system and your specific opinion. Most economies are a mix of capitalism and socialism, since pure capitalism has proven to cover all of society's basic needs. Um, Mixed economics. So, what I'm reading my notes here and then I'll make a lot of sense. So, pure capitalism alone overlooks some of society's um, sections of peoples, for example, children, senior citizens, and others who are unable to work. Capitalism also forgoes the environment and societal infrastructure, which is necessary for economies to grow. So the invisible hand alone may or may not be derived from pure capitalism. In previous chapters, we pretty much said no, it is insufficient. Okay, recap of chapter two. What is the difference between comparative and absolute advantage? So in the last chapter, we talked about comparative advantage being a product or service that a country can produce more effectively and efficiently than most other countries. An absolute advantage is when that country can produce a good or service more effectively and efficiently than all other countries. So, why should the US trade with other nations? So, why not? So, some of the reasons that are productive towards trading with other nations is that we have a global customer base of potential buyers for our goods and services. Productivity can grow when countries produce goods and services, which they have a comparative advantage. Global competition can keep prices down and curtail inflation. Free trade inspires innovation for new products and keeps firms competitive and competitively challenged. And the uninterrupted flow of capital gives access to foreign investments, which can also help keep interest rates low. Some of the reasons why we would not want to trade with other nations is that we are losing our domestic workforce and they're losing jobs and have to shift to lower wage production jobs or service jobs in the economy. So workers might be forced to accept pay cuts from employers. Moving operations overseas can intensify competitive pressure. A result can be a loss of service jobs, then a growing number of white-collar jobs. For example, someone that would be in a manufacturing space in Detroit may lose the manufacturing production plant to overseas offshoring and there have to work in the food service industry. Domestic companies can lose their comparative advantage when competitors build advanced production operations in low-wage countries. So in other words, once it's outsourced, it can't really go back to being based in that within the country. All right, some current events I wanted to mention. As the baby boomers age and are receiving Social Security, there is not a younger generation with the same amount of population to cover what is being paid into Social Security for the future. So eventually, in the next 10 to 20 years, Social Security will run out before this generation ever sees it, unless there are some major legislative changes. And secondly, what does a 30% tariff on China mean for the US? I was looking at my spring semester slides and revising them, and that tariff was 10% at the time that I started this chapter last semester. So we're at 30% on China, and what it means for the US is higher import costs, higher costs for resellers domestically, higher costs for parts manufacturing that comes from China, um, and just overall increase in inflation domestically. Um, I believe that once we see these costs rise, we will never see them return to the low prices that we initially got on importing goods from China. All right, last thing pre-chapter 3. This is not on the exam. This is simply for your edification. A little bit of background on schools of ethical thought will help make this chapter more robust for you and give you more reflection and more considerations when discussing the topics that we're about to introduce. So these are three of my favorite schools of ethical thought. There are many more. There are many variations and sub-variations and combinations of these, but this is a very brief introduction to deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. So would love for you to click on the links in the presentation and either you can pause it now or go back, just I would actually I would watch them prior to starting the chapter 3 discussion because I think it will help build it and edify your knowledge of these topics. So let's get started. Chapter 3, demanding ethical and socially responsible behavior. So, we're going to discuss why we can't just obey the law and use the law as the absolute. We'll talk about three questions that you can ask yourself when potentially faced with an unethical situation. We can describe management's role in setting standards for ethical practices. We'll discuss between compliance-based and integrity-based ethics and list 6 steps in setting up a corporate ethics code. Again, when we're talking about ethics in business, the textbook is slanted towards corporate business with a little bit of emphasis on entrepreneurship. But for the purposes of this chapter, we'll keep it corporate based for our understanding. So we'll define corporate social responsibility and compare the responsibility of various stakeholders. And lastly, we'll analyze the role of U.S. businesses in influencing ethical behavior and social responsibility in global markets. All right. I'd like to open this with a few case studies in ethics that happened in recent years. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau fined Wells Fargo $185 million for creating more than 1.5 million fake accounts and 500,000 fraudulent credit cards in customers' names without their knowledge. This brought widespread attention to a number of other scandals associated with the financial services firm, which has resulted in Wells Fargo paying out $3 billion in lawsuit settlements. Enron. Fastow and others at Enron orchestrated a scheme to use off-balance sheet special purpose vehicles, SPVs, also known as special purpose entities, SPEs, to hide Enron's mountains of debt and toxic assets from investors and creditors. Lastly, Facebook. Facebook's biggest scandal hit in March 2018 when The Guardian and New York Times reported that a firm called Global Science Research had harvested data from millions of Facebook users in 2013 without their explicit consent. This was possible because a previous version of Facebook's privacy policy had allowed apps to access data about users' friends, such as their name, birthday, and location. This had enabled Global Science Research to gather information about 87 million Facebook users, even though only around 30,000 people had actually used their app. These details were later sold to Cambridge Analytica, who used it to create highly targeted ads to encourage users to vote for Trump and Brexit. The furor surrounding this scandal was so serious that Mark Zuckerberg was called to answer questions in front of Congress in the US. These are three of some of the biggest scandals that have been faced in corporate America in recent times. So, can a decision be legal but not ethical? Can a decision be ethical but not legal? We're going to dive into those different scenarios in the coming slides. So, first of all, in order to refer to something as legal, I think we should define it. So, Merriam-Webster calls the law a binding custom or practice of a community. It's a rule of conduct or action prescribed or formally recognized as binding or enforced by a controlling authority. So, what does that mean? That means it needs to be a rule needs to be established, and two, it needs to be enforced. Ethics, on the other hand, is defined as a set of moral principles, a theory or system of moral values. So, what is our standard for ethics? Our fundamental standards are subjective, but there are some, there are a few moral absolutes. This means that everyone can generally agree and not deny that the outlined phrases below are part of overall morality and ethical structure. So, the values of integrity, honesty, respect for human life, courage, self-control, and self-sacrifice. Of these things, there is no straightforward law, honesty in some cases, respect for human life in some cases, but we can all agree that there is a large gray area over these, but in and of themselves, these are basic moral values that exist in humanity. So when we're approached with making an ethical decision, we need to understand, is my proposed action legal? Is it balanced? And how will it make me feel about myself? So what does that mean? Is it legal? Am I in violation of a law or a company policy? Balanced. Is it fair? Would I want to be treated this way? Will I win at the expense of another? Try to avoid major imbalances. Think win-win. Another test that you can use is called the viral test. How would you feel if your actions went viral on the internet? If you're still not sure whether a decision is ethical or not, you can try to consult others, supervisors or mentors. For those of you seeking jobs, um, you want to avoid any ethical dilemmas in the hiring process. Avoid posting anything that you or someone else could potentially find offensive. If you wouldn't bring in a particular picture and post it in your cubicle, for example, or say it in the workplace, definitely remove it from your social page. Be purposeful in your posts. Ask yourself, what is my goal with posting this? Is this best for a private or a public page? Thirdly, keep it simple. Remember that less is more in your public profiles. Rambling on can tend to snowball you into something that becomes a hot subject of debate, or you may inadvertently offend others. Number four, never, ever, ever complain about any employers or colleagues, past or present, on social media. Definitely hiring companies look at your social media pages. They do Google you. They do check your information on LinkedIn and, see who your affiliations are. They see your public pictures posted. And if you're posting being drunk last Friday night, then they will expect that this kind of person is also bringing drinking into the workplace, for example. So again, less is more. Make sure your posts are purposeful. Make sure that they're tailored to a public audience if this information is public, and keep it positive. A quote from Warren Buffett: "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently." Now, when we're setting ethical standards, there are two different types of corporate, um, I guess, motivational ethical codes. You can have compliance-based ethics or integrity-based ethics. Compliance-based ethics emphasizes preventing unlawful behavior by increasing control and by penalizing wrongdoers. This is a legalistic standpoint. If you are complying with the law, That means that there is a rule and that it's being enforced. So compliance-based ethics talks about, emphasizes the rule and emphasizes what happens when the rule is being broken. Integrity-based ethics is more geared toward the moral and ethical value system. It says that defining the guiding values, creating an environment that supports ethically sound behavior, and stressing shared accountability among employees is the way to enforce and keep a positive ethical framework. So, when enforcing corporate ethical standards, there are six main steps that are outlined in your textbook. Number one, top management should adopt and unconditionally support the corporate code of conduct. Do you agree with this? Are there any circumstances that you think that this might not align? Employees must understand that expectations for ethical behavior begins at the top, and senior management expects all employees to act accordingly. So both of these are lead by example um, standards. Number three, managers and others must be trained to consider the ethical implications of all business decisions. This is very important, not only for the individual. For example, an implication might be that they get fired for having unethical practices, but a secondary possibility is that this information could leak and become public. And then it becomes more than just the individual's offense, it becomes the company's. Number four, an ethics office must be set up with which employees can communicate anonymously. Um, these individuals are called whistleblowers. Now, they're insiders who report illegal or unethical behavior, and there are laws protecting whistleblowers. However, corporations need to be able to give these individuals a method or a way um, to report this activity without feeling like they are going to have repercussions directed at them for doing the reporting. So having anonymous tip lines are one way that whistleblowers can communicate without fear of being combated. So, number five, outsiders must be told about the ethics program. Your suppliers, your subcontractors, your distributors need to know what the governing framework is of your business to make sure that they are abiding by your preferences and by your ethical framework. Number six, the ethics code must be enforced with timely action if any rules are broken. So this is the legalistic side, which requires that the rule not only be defined, but also be enforced. What is the penalty for an employee breaking the code of ethics? Um, you know, what uh, what chain of actions would result? All right, now we'll discuss corporate social responsibility. First, we'll define it. It is the concern businesses have for the welfare of society, not just for their owners. So this is a commitment based on integrity, fairness, and respect. Some believe this is not a manager's role. This is a role of everyone in the company. Corporate social responsibility proponents argue that businesses owe their existence to society and that businesses cannot exist without society. And so the success of society is success for the business and for all. Companies with good reputations attract and retain better employees. This is statistically proven. They also draw more customers and enjoy greater employee loyalty. Um, let's see. So, who is the company responsible to? They're responsible to the customers. That could mean a high quality product. That could mean timely resolution of complaints. That could mean ease of transaction process. Responsibility to investors. This could be profit-based. This could also be outlined in reporting, in communications, and into allowing investor feedback. Responsibility to employees. This is providing a safe work environment, benefits, time off, or work-life balance. Responsibility to society and the environment. This may mean cleaning up after the corporation's accidents or building in a way to reach back to the community. This could also mean investments or reinvesting back in the community or hiring local college graduates for their new roles. All right. For investors, um, so ethical behavior doesn't subtract from the bottom line. It tends to add to it. SEC regulates having fair disclosure. Fair disclosure means that if a company tells anyone, they have to tell everyone at the same time. This is true of financial reporting, of any major company reorganizations, or anything that would affect the stock price or any of the stakeholders. Insider trading is an unethical activity which insiders use private company information to further their own fortunes or those of their family and friends. That is when someone in the company has information that the public is not privy to and takes action on that information in order to save themselves from economic failures or expose them to financial risk ahead of other people being aware of it. So social responsibility can be based on a pyramid as outlined in the photograph. The foundation of the pyramid is profitability. If an organization is not profitable, as we learned in chapter 1, and that continues to be the case, then the organization will cease to exist. Above that, it needs to abide by legal responsibilities. This can mean preventing the company from being shut down in the case that it's not following legal actions. So, above that would be its ethical responsibilities. It's the obligation for it to do what's right and to not cause harm to its stakeholders or the environment. The top of the CSR pyramid and the highest level is the philanthropic responsibility of the company. That is for it to be a good corporate citizen, to provide resources to the community, to improve quality of life by the business existing versus not existing. So again, the company has a responsibility to its customers, to its investors, to its employees, and to the environment. I want to leave you with a few popular quotes so you can think about them and reflect. I'm not running for sainthood. I just happen to think that in life we need to be a little like the farmer who puts back into the soil what he takes out. Paul Newman. Sustainability is no longer about doing less harm, it's about doing more good. Jochen Seitz. In just about every gangster movie, there is a scene where the mob boss says, "Hey, I'm just a businessman." William Hageman. It is easy to dodge our responsibilities, but we cannot dodge the consequences of dodging our responsibilities. Sir Josiah Stamp.